the GOP sucks. That's not exactly news, but if you're anything like me, you're getting frustrated with this party of weak losers who doesn't know what time it is. They don't stand really for anything, and we're hungering for something new. We can have something new, we can try to rebuild this one. Joining me now, my friend Auron MacIntyre, who now, if I have this right, Auron, works for the Blaze?
Yes, sir. Just got started here recently.
Congratulations, my friend. Well-deserved, not surprised in the least. All right, first of all, explain to people why the GOP sucks. Because a lot of people hate the GOP. It's not new, but what really makes them so useless? What's wrong with them?
Well, of course, there's a lot of different issues, but the main one, I think, right now is the understanding of kind of where we're at. Like you said, what time it is. A lot of people in the GOP are still fighting as if they're somewhere in the 1990s. They're hoping that a small course correction in language, a general change in direction will kind of put everything back on track, right? And what we're seeing is that this continually playing the small ball and letting the frame get set by their opponents, instead of understanding that the people who are doing this are malicious and don't have your best interests in mind and don't share your values, is constantly leading them to failure.
Well, if it's obvious, look, this stuff is obvious to normal people. It's obvious to everyone watching you and me talk right now. It's obvious to me, and I have an IQ of 5. So why do the Harvard-educated GOP senators not see what Mr. Construction can see?
Well, again, there's a lot of different reasons. One reason is a lot of these people share a class and share an interest with many of the Democrats and those in power. These people work constantly in things like the security state apparatus. They're involved with federal law enforcement. They have deep interest when it comes to woke capital that is now aligned with the Democrats. And so while it's very useful for them to appear opposed to certain aspects, they make sure to never really challenge anything that's at the core of what's going on. And the people who are actually interested in changing things, the people who aren't completely bought and sold, in many ways, they're scared of taking on the big issues because, as we're seeing from things like the Twitter files, the corruption runs deep into very essential parts of our state, like the FBI. And that's the kind of thing that you don't just draft a piece of legislation to fix. You can't just hold a committee hearing and hope that that's going to go ahead and scare people into acting correctly. It's a much more serious and much deeper problem that rubs a lot of very powerful people the wrong way, and a lot of people aren't willing to take that on.
Why does it rub people the wrong way, Auron? Because I totally agree with what you're saying. We're dealing with class differences here, but I would think a Washington, D.C. millionaire, just like the rural Iowa farmer, doesn't want his son to chop his penis off.
Well, you would think that, but the social pressure is really immense. I mean, look what has happened in a party like the GOP over the last, 10, 15 years, just on the issue of the definition of marriage, right? The position of many people in the GOP is now very far to the left of people like Barack Obama and Joe Biden just not that long ago. And so actually they're not interested in ruffling those feathers in many ways. They've taken those definitions and taken the values of the left on as the status quo. They are treating those things as a fait accompli, and there's no reason for them to challenge any of that kind of stuff. This is also true, again, of things like the FBI. When you have people who for a very long time, understandably, have asked people to support the government, support, people who are supposed to be protecting us, it's very difficult for them to turn around and say, okay, well, now those people, that apparatus is the same thing that is endangering many people who are in red states, conservatives trying to protect their children. That's a very difficult thing for many people to admit. That requires them to say, we made mistakes. We didn't see what was coming down the pipe. And when you're a leader, that's often the scariest thing to do.
Auron, you mentioned in the very beginning reframing, how we don't reframe. Give me some kind of an example, some kind of an explanation. What does that mean? Because you're right, we allow them to set the terms. We play on their field with their referees enforcing their rules at all times. It's amazing to watch. What should we be doing?
Well, let's take a look at something really current, right? We just had Elon Musk kicking some journalists off the Twitter for doxing him and his kids, right? And it's an extremely dangerous situation. I believe Elon Musk's son was already followed by a alleged stalker, so he's taking this very seriously. And of course, we saw a bunch of right-wing, or people who are supposed to be right-wing, so conservative commentators rush to the defense of these journalists, and you can never kick them off. You can never even give them a temporary suspension for this kind of things because it's an abuse of power. But of course, these journalists would never treat anyone like that. They were, of course, endangering these people. They knew they were endangering these people. We've seen that journalists are regularly complicit in the intimidation and eventual instigation of left-wing violence. We saw that with the riots of the last election. We saw that with things like the encouragement of illegal mobs outside the houses of Supreme Court justices after the leak of the Roe versus Wade decision, and the eventual threats on people like Brett Kavanaugh. So we know that the journalists are more than happy to dox people, point mobs at them, threaten people, intimidate them. This is a regular feature of the left. But rather than recognize this and recognize that Elon Musk was taking steps to send a message to these people that, hey, you don't get to threaten my family. And I thought that was a conservative value, right? Fathers protecting their families. But instead, we got a bunch of really weak Republican GOP conservative commentator rushing forward saying, no, those aren't our principles. We can't have consequences for our enemies' actions. That would teach them the wrong lesson. And how could we not lose with that kind of approach?
Auron, we haven't had a real third party, not a robust third party in this country, which is kind of weird. I mean, people don't realize, like, Canada has like 25 parties, Europe has 1,000. We have this real rigid two-party system here. As dissatisfaction with both parties grows, do you think we will finally get something we really haven't had, some kind of a third party rise? And I'm not talking about the libertarians.
I mean, it's possible, but these often have very disastrous effects for the parties they splinter off of, right? You look at something like the election of Woodrow Wilson, which happens because Teddy Roosevelt decides to run against what was his originally appointed successor, Taft, right? And that ensures that Wilson wins. So splitting the party is just mathematically a failure in the United States over and over again. It's pretty much always a mistake. I think you will see a rise of people who are very fed up with what's happening. Again, I don't know that the GOP is able to be reformed, but if there is going to be a popular political force that arises, it probably will need to take a path through the GOP, though what will be the GOP once it rises will look drastically different from what it looks like right now, if it does.
Auron, the GOP as it's currently constituted, the potential 2024 field, we're talking about rebuilding it. Am I the only one who's basically indifferent to all these people at this point in time? Everyone seems to be in love with someone. I'm not. I don't really care.
Yeah, again, I think it's focusing on the wrong thing. I mean, obviously it matters who runs. That will be a big deal. But until the GOP is willing to address things that are a real systemic issue, a real mechanical issue for them, then I don't understand how they can move forward. As we're looking at the Twitter files, we now understand very clearly that federal law enforcement, the FBI, involves itself very directly in not only the censorship of regular people on social media in a very politically motivated manner, but it actually directly involves itself in election outcomes. It wants to interfere in elections. We also see the transformation of the voting system to now, we instead of having day of elections, we now have weeks and weeks of possible, ballot counting, all designed to allow the procedural manipulation by Democrats who have really invested heavily in controlling this apparatus to make sure that elections go their way. If you're a serious party, if the GOP ever wants to be a serious party, they have to address this stuff, and they have to address it now. They can't sit around, whinging about candidate quality or, one or two talking points. Ooh, is the New York Times going to write a bad article about us? I don't know, guys. Right now, they're actually changing the way people get elected to assure that you can never, ever win again if they don't want you to. But yeah, okay, let's go ahead and wonder if the New York Post or the Washington Post is running something that you don't like.
Auron, come back soon, brother. Appreciate you. Did you enjoy that? I know you did. If you did, You can go to thefirsttv.com/support and watch the whole thing, our special on rebuilding the GOP, which very much needs it. Thefirsttv.com/support.